I'm not sure if you've seen it, but over the past few weeks, one by one, platforms started rolling out mandatory age verification. Now, to listen to certain music on Spotify, you have to provide your government ID or biometric verification to a third party. To access certain Reddit communities, users must also verify their age through a third party, which involves submitting either a government ID, a selfie, or both, even for long-time users. To watch videos on YouTube, they'll be using AI systems that will calculate your age based on your behavior, viewing habits, and engagement history, and then restrict content based on what they deem suitable for you. This sudden wave of ID checks across major platforms wasn't a coincidence. It was the result of a global wave of government mandates that just came to a head, marking the start of a new era for the internet. This isn't just a new login screen or a more annoying sign-up flow. It's a fundamental shift in how the internet works, transforming it from a system built on openness to one built on surveillance and control. We've quietly rewritten the terms under which people are allowed to access the digital world, and most people haven't even noticed it's happening. In this video, we're going to look at the attack on privacy going on right now all over the world. We're going to look at how we got here and how we can change course quickly, because the more these systems become normalized, the harder they'll be to undo. So if we want a different future, we have to move fast and start building on the version of the internet that puts people back in control. Let's start with the UK, where the Online Safety Act quietly changed the rules for what the internet is allowed to be. The law marks a fundamental shift. You now need to verify your identity simply to watch a video, share a website, or share your thoughts. It mandates strict age checks for any platform deemed to host harmful or adult content. But that definition is deliberately broad. It includes anything with user-generated content, which basically means every social media site, forum, messaging app, and video platform. Under this system, users are now being asked to submit government ID or facial scans just to browse, communicate, or participate online. The law passed in late 2023, but Ofcom, the UK's communications regulator, gave platforms until mid-2025 to implement these systems. That's why we're seeing everything change now. A huge chunk of the internet has just been seized under the guise of safety, and the implications are enormous. We're normalizing identity checks just to participate online. This isn't really about protecting children, that's just the justification. But what's being built is a system where anonymity is treated as a threat and participation requires permission. And it's not just happening in the UK. In the past few weeks, governments around the world have begun moving in lockstep, each advancing their own surveillance regime in what feels like a sudden synchronized wave. In Canada, Bill C2 was introduced. It expands surveillance powers to allow police warrantless access to your identity, login history, and online activity. It mandates backdoors in apps and platforms, giving authorities real-time access to user data and communications. In Australia, access to YouTube and social media is now banned for anyone under 16. The government mandated that you submit face scans and government IDs to use them, and they plan to expand these controls to search engines too, embedding identity checks into everyday browsing. In the European Union, a law known as chat control has been quietly advancing for years. It would require platforms to automatically scan all private messages, emails, and stored files. This includes encrypted messages, which would effectively eliminate end-to-end encryption across Europe. The proposal was first introduced in 2022, but the majority of EU member states opposed it, and progress stalled. But then in 2024, Hungary took over the rotating presidency of the Council of the EU and used that position to bring the law back. A new version was introduced, and this time Denmark backed it. Now the law is headed for a final vote in October 2025. If it passes, it will enable mass surveillance across every major messaging platform in Europe. In addition, the Digital Services Act in the EU requires certain platforms hosting user user-generated content to implement strict age verification, giving companies a 12-month window to comply. In Switzerland, a new surveillance law would force VPNs, messaging apps, and online platforms to log user identities, IP addresses, and metadata for government access. Companies like Proton have announced that they will relocate if the law is passed. But to where? And in the US, dozens of states are pushing new laws that mirror these restrictions, forcing people to verify their identity, prove their age, and give their real name just to use basic online services. So that's why Spotify is suddenly asking for your ID, and why YouTube is experimenting with AI-driven age enforcement, and why Reddit, Meta, Discord, and others are quietly preparing to roll out similar ID collection. Even in countries that don't legally require these measures, platforms are rolling out global policies anyway, because it's simpler and cheaper to have a single policy everywhere. This forces every country into the same authoritarian policies, whether they wanted them or not. This is the moment the internet changed forever. And it's chilling. We're yet to fully grasp what's ahead. How did we get to a point where suddenly it became acceptable for governments to implement policies like these? None of it happened overnight. It required years of laying groundwork. Over time, we've seen platforms gradually introduce more identity checks. First, it's phone number verification, then it's government ID, then biometric scans. Sometimes these changes are framed as anti-fraud measures or safety features, but one reason they've become so common is quiet pressure from governments. They might tell the platform, "We're worried about disinformation on your platform," or "This app poses national security risks. You might want to address that before we're forced to take action." This tactic is known as jawboning. It's informal, behind-the-scenes pressure from lawmakers and regulators. No new legislation is needed. A strong suggestion is often enough. What looks like voluntary compliance is often something else entirely. Some people suggest that this sudden global crackdown on privacy must have been a coordinated and deliberate strike. Maybe, but a simpler explanation is that the time was right. For years, platforms have slowly adopted these changes, which normalized the idea. Each small change felt minor and tolerable, so by the time governments introduce a legal mandate, almost no one pushes back. The norms have already shifted. The world was primed, and now a wave of regulation has swept in almost unopposed. So what now? What does this shift actually mean for us? I mean, show your papers is not a healthy default for a free society, especially not on a network that was originally designed for openness, collaboration, and the free exchange of information without gatekeepers. But there's even more to be concerned about. KYC is actually dangerous. KYC stands for Know Your Customer. It was formalized in the Patriot Act as a standard for verifying financial accounts. And whenever people talk about KYC, we're always told it's essential to prevent fraud and keep us safe. But we rarely talk about the other side of it, the liability that comes with collecting and storing this kind of sensitive data. These databases are breached constantly, and when they are, they don't just expose financial information, they make people targets for harassment, extortion, or worse. KYC isn't protection, it's exposure. And last month, we got a stark reminder of just how dangerous that exposure can be. There was a massive breach that the entire internet was talking about.
The T app announcing a massive data breach to their systems last week. Roughly 72,000 images, including verification selfies and images of government IDs, have been leaked online.
T was marketed as a dating safety app for women, and in order to use the app, women were asked to verify their identity by uploading selfies and government IDs. It turns out that these files weren't properly secured, and when the database was discovered, people all over the world began downloading and sharing its contents. Now, this was a controversial app. It was an information sharing site where women could warn other women about men that they dated, disclose abuse, protect others from catfish. But critics argued that the accusations blurred the line between caution and public shaming. So when this data was breached, some saw the breach as ironic. even deserved.
Like, that's 100% karma.
Many people started sharing the leaked documents as a form of retribution, but in the data were also the IP addresses of users, and these started to become shared also. And then people started to make maps showing exactly where these women lived. You might never have said anything nasty on the app and were simply using it because you worried about your safety, and now your face, government ID, and home address were all being eagerly shared. Now, how you feel about the app isn't the takeaway here. It's that this data never should have been collected in the first place. What happened with T reflects a much larger issue, that everyone is collecting this information without a second thought, even though none of them can keep it safe. And it's putting people in danger. We've seen countless crypto-related businesses get their databases hacked. And as a result, there's been a surge in related kidnappings and extortion attempts across the world, as criminals now have the home addresses of those who own Bitcoin. There have been dating websites that collect real names and billing information that were hacked, and the user data leaked online. People have been blackmailed and publicly outed because of this data. People have even taken their own lives in the aftermath of such breaches. Even the IRS has been hacked many times, and in one data breach, hundreds of thousands of taxpayers had their full financial history exposed, including income, employment records, home addresses, and family details. This kind of information leads to devastating identity theft and fraud that can financially ruin people. If we want a safer internet, we need to stop equating surveillance with security. Companies and government agencies claim that they're protecting you, but in reality, they're collecting sensitive data with almost no accountability. It's marketed as protection, but what it delivers is exposure. Users are rarely told where their data goes, how long it's kept, or who has access to it. T's own privacy policy stated in black and white, selfies and government ID images will be deleted immediately following the completion of the verification process. Yet here we are, over 72,000 images are now circulating online, scraped from an open Firebase bucket. This kind of betrayal is disturbingly common. Companies collect high-risk personal data and reassure users with vague promises. We only keep it temporarily. We delete it right after verification. It's stored securely. These phrases are repeated often to make us feel better about handing over our most private information, but there's rarely any oversight and almost never any enforcement. At TSA checkpoints in the US, travelers are now being asked to scan their faces. The official line is that the images are deleted immediately. But how do we know? Who verifies that? There's no public access to these systems, no independent audit, no transparency. We're simply asked to trust. The truth is, we usually don't know where our data goes. Just for verification has become an excuse for massive data collection. And even if a company intends to delete your data, it still exists long enough to be copied, leaked, or stolen. Temporary storage is still storage. These breaches show how fragile these assurances really are. And these KYC pipelines, now being mandated around the world, are a perfect storm of risk. They collect extremely sensitive data, normalize handing it over, and operate behind a curtain of unverifiable claims. It's time to stop accepting, "Don't worry, it's safe," as a substitute for actual security. If your platform requires storing sensitive personal data, that data becomes a liability the moment it's collected. The safest database is the one that never existed. So what is the path to safety? Well, we need to minimize what gets collected in the first place. The internet was conceived as a tool for freedom and connection, but because of these choke points, it has rapidly descended into a surveillance dystopia where every click, view, and conversation is gated by ID checkpoints. Our greatest platform for free expression has become our greatest instrument of control. We can't accept this shift passively. The normalization of mandatory identity verification is deeply harmful. Privacy isn't suspicious or criminal, it's normal, and we have to push back. back forcefully and unapologetically against this cultural change. On many platforms, we can still use pseudonyms. We can still fight to protect those rights, and we should. We should also challenge laws that mandate identity systems and challenge platforms that collect unnecessary identification data. But ultimately, centrally controlled gatekeepers will always be weak points. They can be pressured by governments, regulators, and others to implement systems of censorship and control. So maybe the real solution is not to keep patching this system. Maybe we need to rethink the architecture of the internet itself and build something that doesn't rely on permission at all. This means designing decentralized systems. Checkpoints only work when there's a central place to do the checking. They rely on platforms that can act as gatekeepers to content, and these platforms become easy targets for governments to enforce identity checks, surveillance, and control. Decentralized infrastructure breaks that model. It distributes control across many independent participants, which makes it inherently resistant to coercion and significantly harder for governments to impose censorship. This is why decentralization is not a fringe idea. It is a critical piece of the fight for online freedom. There are already some cool decentralized tools that you can explore, and we'll dive further into them in future videos. But just to name a few that are already gaining traction, BitChat is a Bluetooth mesh messaging network that enables peer-to-peer communication among nearby devices without requiring internet access. Meshtastic uses small radio devices to create local mesh networks independent from the internet. SimpleX is a serverless peer-to-peer messaging app with no identifiers or phone numbers required. IPFS is a distributed file storage system where instead of relying on centralized servers, files are split and stored across independent nodes, so there's no single point of failure. And there are many decentralized social media platforms already out there, like Mastodon, Nostra, Blue Sky, and Matrix. These services don't yet have the reach of the major social media giants, and in practice, most users still gather around a few popular nodes or relays. That can create new points of vulnerability. But even with these limitations, these platforms represent meaningful progress. I am genuinely optimistic about the future of decentralized social media. And as more people learn to run their own servers and nodes, these networks will become stronger, more resilient, and much harder to censor. So yes, the past few weeks have been scary. And yes, we've reached a major inflection point in the evolution of the internet. Control, surveillance, and censorship are now part of the infrastructure itself. Identification is the default. No ID, no entry. No selfie, no account. KYC culture has spread far beyond finance into social platforms, community forums, and dating apps. But that doesn't mean we've lost. It means that a new fight has just begun. Decentralization and encryption disrupt the core mechanics of surveillance. They make it harder to monitor users, inject backdoors, and enforce ID checkpoints. These tools are still growing, but we need them now. The more people who use them, the stronger they become, and the harder they are to shut down. We need to build, support, and spread these alternatives. This is a landslide of lost freedoms, and it happened in mere weeks. This transformation wasn't an accident. It was the inevitable result of complacency and quiet normalization. But it will become permanent if we don't resist. The best path forward is to reimagine the internet, not as a landscape of checkpoints and control, but as the free and open network it was always meant to be. It's time to move full speed into Internet 3.0. The future is decentralized. nbtv is a project of the Ludlow Institute, a non-profit research and media institute dedicated to helping people reclaim ownership of their digital lives. If you found this video helpful, and if you want to see more content like this, or if you believe that privacy is worth fighting for, consider supporting our work. You can visit ludlowinstitute.org/donate to set up a monthly tax-deductible donation. Your contributions help keep our content free, independent, and accessible to everyone. And if you want to support us in style, check out our merch shop. Every t-shirt, sticker, hoodie helps fund our mission and lets the world know where you stand.